So, if you saw part one of this three-part series on the lessons of the Redwoods, you know that Abby and myself just came back from a road trip down the Oregon and California coast through the Redwood Forest and down San Diego, Orange County, all that. But you know that we went and saw the Redwoods. We went and experienced the the beauty and the majesty of these amazing redwood trees. That we have nothing like this here. You know that we talked about in part one how big and massive these root systems were. I mean, we have a picture of Abby standing there at the roots, and they're 2, 3, 4 times taller than she is, and that's just the roots. And we have a picture of a tree there that is, I think, 370 plus feet tall, 1,000 years old. I mean, it's amazing to see what these trees have become, what they've endured. Fire, earthquake, drought. We talked about how in the midst of drought, these trees still survive because their roots go so down, far down deep into the soil, that they tap in the water that from the surface you couldn't tell was there. And use that as a reminder for us to dig deep into God, and He will give us water. He will give us living water in the midst of dry times in our society. So today, we kind of want to look at the size of those trees, but we want to look at beginnings. See, everything starts somewhere. Every massive undertaking starts somewhere. Every life starts with a baby, starts with an egg. Everything starts from a small beginning. In fact, in Zechariah, it says this in chapter 4, verse 10. Do not despise the small beginnings, for the Lord rejoices to see the work begin, to see the plumb line in Zerubbabel's hand. See, God loves beginnings. We're in the middle of a church plant right now that, yeah, we're not the size of a mega church, and it can be a little disheartening to not see the numbers that you would hope to have. But God says, do not despise humble beginnings. Enjoy the small times. Enjoy the small beginnings. Because you don't know what's going to lead into. So, when we came back, we look at these, I'm looking at these massive trees. And just being awe-inspired by how big these trees are. We walked through this grove. It's called the Founder's Grove. Some of the oldest trees in the Redwoods. And just looking up at how big these trees are. How big around they are. I mean, I try to wrap my arms around one and I don't even get a fraction of the way around it. It's amazing how big they are. But then to think about, as I'm thinking about this, I look down and I see this. This right here. I don't know if you can see. This we would call a pine cone. This is a pine cone. This is a seed from one of those massive redwoods. This little tiny thing goes into the ground and becomes a massive redwood. I mean, this is smaller than most of the pine cones that we see here in Washington that grow our cedar trees, our pine trees, our hemlocks, that are majestic in their own way, but are nowhere near the size or with the presence of a redwood. You know, your typical hemlock tree, 100 feet tall. A cedar tree, some of our great cedar trees can get to be close to 200, a little bit over 200. We're talking trees that are 300 plus, close to 400 feet tall. From a pine cone that is a fraction of the size of those other trees. It just reminded me of the fact that even the smallest seed, even the smallest little inkling can become the biggest change agent in the world. The smallest little thought can become the biggest breakthrough in the world. When we think about things like electricity, started with a little thought. Cars, just a little tiny thought that became what it is today. We have so many cars on the road. Think about any great idea. It started with just that small, tiny pinprick of an inkling. In the same way, these redwoods start with this little tiny seed, and over time, as their roots got down deep into the soil, as they tapped into that water down below, they continued to grow and gain strength and gain stature. And over time, they started to gain this. People started to become aware of how big and beautiful what was being created was. What started out as a small seed is now this massive tree, is now this massive presence of creation. And I don't know about you, but I have many great ideas, or I think are great ideas. I have big ideas. I love to dream. I love to think about things. But at the same time, being a realist, I think, yeah, that's never going to happen. I can't accomplish that. What can I do to change the world? What can I do to reach the world for God? How can I start a ministry? How can I do anything that is going to leave any sort of legacy like we see with these trees? Because I just have this little tiny idea. And it's very easy when you're planting to think, well, it's not going to become a redwood. But the fact that the redwoods exist, the fact that they grew up from a little seed, should be encouragement to you that when God gives you that little tiny mustard seed, let's remember that he says if you have faith like a mustard seed, you can move a mountain. A mustard seed is far smaller than this. So if we can just dig into that seed of what God has given us, if we're faithful to allow our roots to go deep, we don't know what we can accomplish with even the smallest idea. With that smallest idea, we don't automatically go from small idea to big tree. I would love to. I would really love that. I am chronically impatient. Which, on a road trip, you would think would have probably made for a very long trip for us, but for whatever reason, being on a road trip, we loved it. It was great. It was awesome. But I am chronically impatient, and I would love to go from small seed to massive tree immediately. I'd love to go from starting a ministry to being a worldwide ministry impacting thousands of people. That's not the case. So how am I going to get to where I want to get? How am I going to go from small seed to big tree? Well, much like that small seed and that small beginning, it's small steps. Taking it one day at a time. One interaction with a neighbor at a time. One interaction with someone at church. Praying with somebody one day at a time. How do we grow to be a redwood for God? Well, we talked about the roots, but it's taking those roots, and those trees bring life to others, right? So we need to bring life to others in small steps. Let me pray for you. Let me get into the Word so I can have something to share when someone is feeling down. Let me get into the Word so I have strength to sustain against the attacks. Let me dig deep, but take small steps. If we'll take the smallest steps, even with the smallest seed, we'll become the biggest tree in the forest. So, in part 2, we see, don't worry about small beginnings, because small beginnings can still lead to big trees. But, as we saw in part 1, let's let our roots go down deep. So roots down deep and small steps from small beginnings. Tune in for part 3.